And welcome back to Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and we got some new cards to talk about. I mean, we pretty much always have new cards to talk about, but specifically in this video, I'm talking about the Fallout cards. If you're not aware of them, as I will be doing going forward with any of the Universes Beyond stuff, I have decided what I will do is cover the cards that I think you need to be aware of in the Commander format, because of course, there's a lot of people that probably don't want to play these cards, have no interest in them, but it's good to be aware of them because you will likely be interacting with them going forward playing Commander games. The ones I picked out here are the ones that I think for sure you're going to come across. There's some interesting Commanders as well, but definitely cards you're going to see. Basically, the Universes Beyond falls into two categories. The first category being the Lord of the Rings D&D stuff, which for me, again, it's all subjective, but for me, that feels more like it fits in the Magic universe, whereas the Street Fighter, Stranger Things, Doctor Who stuff doesn't feel like it does. And this is more the second group, I think. It doesn't really, I mean, some of it's maybe more than others. Certainly some of these cards are like, that feels weird in a Magic universe, but, you know, I mean, to each their own. Obviously, you're going to grab these cards if you're interested in them. These are the ones that I think for sure we're going to see in the Commander format. Let's start out with Mutational Advantage. 1 green and a blue instant. Permanents you control with counters on them gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Well, that's pretty good. Prevent all damage that would be dealt to those permanents this turn and proliferate. That's a whole lot on one card. I find it really interesting that they give the permanents indestructible, but also prevent all damage that would be dealt to those permanents this turn? I wonder what the reason for that wording is there. I guess the thinking is, because this is any permanent, so this is a slam dunk, obviously +1/+1 counter theme, the proliferate and all that, but a Super Friends deck is also, like, if you had an Atraxa Super Friends deck, this is a slam dunk. And is it possible, like the way Indestructible works is you still take damage, but you don't die from it. A Stuffy Doll is a perfect example. There's an indestructible creature, still takes all the damage from Blasphemous Act, and you get to throw it around, right? So here, I'm wondering if that wording, because preventing all damage seems worthless if it's indestructible, right? Maybe it's because of Planeswalkers, because when you deal damage to Planeswalkers, you remove the loyalty counters and those wouldn't come back. I think that maybe is the reason for that wording. It is interesting. I mean, this card's doing a ton. If you're in any deck that is blue and green colors that is doing a counter theme, you're going to want this regardless of what that theme is. All right, Megaton's Fate. This is an interesting one. 5 and a red sorcery, choose 1. Destroy target artifact, create 4 treasure tokens. Now that's not super great. For 6 mana, that's not super great. Destroying 1 artifact and creating 4 treasure tokens, yeah. However, I really like the second mode here. Megaton's Fate deals 8 damage to each creature. Each player gets 4 rad counters. So we'll get to the rad counters. The important part here is 8 damage to each creature is pretty good. That is a pretty darn good board wipe. And you got the versatility here, right? You can destroy an artifact. You can create treasure tokens. 8 damage to each creature is likely going to kill everything. It's not a guarantee. But as I say, red board wipes are actually pretty much like that. There is almost no guarantee. Even a Blasphemous Act isn't always going to get everything. That's how red board wipes work. 8 damage is usually going to get everything. Now, the rad counters are a new mechanic from this set. Again, you got to be aware of this stuff. That's one of the reasons I grabbed this card, because I wanted to talk about the rad counters. They are like energy counters or infect counters. They are counters that players get. So it says at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, if you have any rad counters, mill that many cards. For each non-land card milled this way, you lose 1 life and a rad counter. So the rad counters go away. So it's going to fit a milling theme, you know, self-milling or otherwise, although you do lose the life. The rad counters go away, you know, obviously because they're counters on your opponents, you can proliferate them, all of that. Is that going to fit in any red deck, right? Obviously in this card particularly, is there any chance that you actually care about the rad counters? Maybe. I think it's not super significant on this card. Ultimately, it is probably going to have your opponents lose a little bit of life. But the modes here, creating treasures, destroying artifacts, 8 damage to each creature is all pretty darn good. All right, let's talk about Diamond City, which is a land, enters the battlefield with a shield counter on it. So we got those again, taps to add a colorless. So already we have a land that is colorless, can go in any deck, and doesn't enter the battlefield tapped, which means there's very little reason to not find room for it in a deck, as long as you're not playing a lot of colors, right? Tap, move a shield counter from Diamond City onto target creature. Activate only if you had 2 or more creatures enter the battlefield under your control this turn. Just a very easy land to slot into any deck. Having 2 or more creatures enter the battlefield under your control this turn is not very difficult if you have either a token theme or any creature heavy theme. If you have a proliferate theme, you can proliferate the shield counters on this and use it over and over again. I mean, it's just one of those lands, right? It's another one of those lands that you could very easily slot into any deck. And if you never even use the shield counter, it just is a land that taps for mana and doesn't enter the battlefield tapped. There's almost no downside. So it's going to be very easy to find room for this in certain decks, especially if you're in a deck like maybe a mono red deck or some deck where you have a little bit of trouble protecting your commander, right? Battle of Hoover Dam. Of all the cards that I'm talking about here, this is the one that I might maybe try to find room for. 3 and a white enchantment. As Battle of Hoover Dam enters the battlefield, choose NCR or Legion. So it's like those Khans, Dragons enchantments that we're all familiar with, right? You're going to pick essentially a mode. That's the one you're going to get. So NCR says at the beginning of your end step, return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. That's pretty darn good. And that's the reason why I have a couple of decks where it fits really, really good. We'll be talking about that soon. Maybe when you watch my personal decks video here coming up in a couple of weeks, you can figure out which decks this is very easily going to slot into. Also, though, Legion, pretty good as well. Whenever a creature you control dies, put 2+1/+1 counters on target creature you control. That's really fantastic. And in fact, both of those modes are pretty fantastic in like an Aristocrats deck where you're sacrificing your creatures. You could easily get them back. And in fact, you could put this in any Aristocrats deck, black-white Aristocrats deck, for example. And before you start sacrificing all your creatures, you don't have a full graveyard yet. You can pick the Legion, and whenever a creature you control dies, because you're sacrificing them, put 2 counters on some other creature. Or now it's later in the game, my graveyard's really full, and I can pick the NCR and start getting all those creatures back. Seems pretty fantastic in a whole lot of decks, right? Okay, let's talk about Adom Eyes. 2 black and a green instant. Destroy target non-land permanent and proliferate. So that is it. And I had asked on the Discord, it seems like a pretty good removal spell, but where does it fit? Now, obviously, if you're in a black-green deck that is doing a +1/+1 counters theme or some sort of counters theme, like a Mazarek deck seems like a slam dunk. Skullbriar seems like another, any black-green deck where you want to be destroying non-land permanents, which of course is every deck, but also where you might want to be proliferating. Oh, you know what? A Patra deck is probably another slam dunk for this guy because you want to proliferate the -1/-1 counters on your opponent's creatures. So there's probably for sure a few commanders with this an absolute slam dunk. Again, maybe you weren't paying attention to this set coming out at all because you're not really a big fan of Fallout or Universes Beyond, but you got one of the Patra deck or a Mazarek deck where you're like, okay, maybe I should run out and buy this because it's a slam dunk. How is this though outside of the proliferate though? I mean, 4 mana instant speed, just destroy target non-land permanents. Pretty darn good. That's definitely worth putting in any deck. I would not fault anyone for doing that, even if you never use the proliferate. And there can be some situations where, hey, you know what? I got another opponent playing in an infect deck, and Buddy's got poison counters, and I can proliferate his poison counters. There is also those situations as well. All right, Bottle Cap Blast. 4 in a red instant has improvise. So, of course, your artifacts can help cast this spell. Each artifact you tap reduces it by 1. Bottle Cap Blast deals 5 damage to any target. Not bad. And of course it is improvise. If excess damage was dealt to a permanent this way, create that many tapped treasure tokens. So again, I'm mentioning this card, and I guess the other one as well, because it's a card creating treasure tokens, and anytime you have any card creating treasure tokens, people are going to be giving it a hard look for the commander format. I would say this one is probably more worth it. It's certainly going to be more popular than is the other one. It is very easy to tap down a couple of artifacts, have this cost like 3 mana, deal 5 damage to your opponent's Thrasios, whatever good creature they have, and then you're going to deal 2 excess damage and create 2 tapped treasure tokens. That seems pretty good, right? A decent removal spell. I wouldn't play this outside of a artifact theme because I guess any deck has artifacts, right? So you certainly could. This is a tough one. This is definitely a card that could be really popular in the format or maybe not really at all. Definitely can see a lot of play. Again, if you're in a treasure token theme, it's very easily slot that in there because you're doing it anyway. For me, again, in my deck where I'm doing the treasure token theme sort of, I just don't have room. So because we already have so much bunch of cards that are doing that anyway. I think this is definitely one worth giving consideration, though. All right, Vault 13, Dweller's Journey, and I will also point out here, I know nothing about the game. It's a post-apocalyptic video game, right, or something. That's all I know. I know nothing else. There's a whole bunch of sagas that came out in this set that are all vaults. I have heard from my patrons on the Discord that play the game that the flavor is pretty darn good here. So as a card, mechanically, what's it doing? 3 and a white. Enchantment Saga, of course. Chapter 1 for each player. Exile up to 1 other target enchantment or creature that player controls until Vault 13 leaves the battlefield. So we have that Oblivion Ring type of effect. So you can hit yourself as well. It is up to, so you don't have to. Chapter 2, you gain 2 life and scry 2. That's all right. What does it have to do with the first thing? Probably nothing, but again, it's probably a flavor thing, right? Chapter 3, return 2 cards exiled with Vault 13 to the battlefield under their owner's control and put the rest on the bottom of their owner's libraries. This is a very interesting card because, of course, it's going to come down. It's going to do that Oblivion Ring thing. You know, you have the Chapter 2, which is all right. Then when you get to Chapter 3, you're going to only return 2 cards, which means that is the scenario where you likely want to hit your own thing, because if you hit 3 of your opponents, only one of them has to come back. You can get one of their enchantments or creatures off the battlefield temporarily, but for the other 2 guys, they're permanently gone. And this is hitting creature or enchantment. That's pretty good. And then, of course, on top of that, you can really play around with that last ability with yourself, where in a blinking theme, this is probably fantastic. It's a decent, I would say, removal option, although white already has lots of those. But if I'm in a blinking theme, I might find room for this, because now I can get 2 of my opponent's best things off the table, one of them temporarily, and then I can also blink something of mine. I can blink something of mine and board wipe, and then my thing comes back after. You know, there's a whole bunch of scenarios where this can be great. You can do the politics thing here as well, where you've exiled all your opponent's stuff, and who wants to, you know, not attack me and get their thing back? Those scenarios as well. I think this is a pretty neat card in a Commander game. All right, Vault 11 also is a pretty neat one. Voter's Dilemma, 2 white and a black enchantment saga. Chapter 1 for each opponent. You create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. So could be 1, could be 3, could be more, I guess. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. Each player secretly votes for up to 1 creature. If no creature got votes, each player draws a card. Well, that's interesting. Otherwise, destroy each creature with the most votes or tied for the most votes. So again, very interesting sort of political scenario here. The voting stuff always is. I mean, keep in mind, you are getting those human tokens. Could be good in a human tribal deck. You know, if you're looking for a scenario other than I just want to play this card because it's neat, the human tribal deck, Soldier Tribal, maybe in white, black, I don't know. Aristocrats theme, again, seems like a pretty good fit because, you know, you always want those tokens that you can sacrifice to stuff. A token theme in general in black and white is good. All around, though, I think it's a pretty neat card. All right, VATS. So VATS. I have no idea what that means, but as a commander card, I think it's pretty good. 2 black, black, instant, has split second. Yes, they revisited split second again in this set. I believe there's a few cards with split second. Choose any number of target creatures with equal toughness. Destroy the chosen creatures. So I think this is a pretty good removal spell. It's a unique one for sure. It can be just a really one-sided, fantastic, not board wipe, but, you know, I get a bunch of creatures off the battlefield. I mean, what's the worst case scenario here, right? The worst case scenario is, so if I have a creature on the battlefield that has a 5 toughness that I don't want to lose, and my opponent has a 5 toughness creature that I really want to get off the battlefield, I'm choosing any number, so I just choose theirs. And no one else has 5 toughness? Okay, well, 4 mana, instant speed, split second, of course, can't be countered, can't be reacted to. This is 4 mana, instant speed. I can destroy any creature. That's the worst case scenario here. So already we have a great removal spell, but there also can be some incredible blowout situations here. There can be my opponent just happens to have a bunch of creatures with the same toughness, so do some other opponents. Again, this is choose any number, so you don't have to choose any of your creatures. There's no way you're hurting yourself here at all, really, right? There's no downside here. There can be my opponent just Avenger of Zendikar. They create 20 of those plant tokens. I can either, you know, they crack their fetch land to put the counters on it. I can look at the board, right? And that's why I like cards like this. They're really neat that way. I look at the board because, of course, those plant tokens are a 1 toughness. So I'm thinking, okay, I want to destroy all those plant tokens. Do I destroy them now when they're an 0/1 because there's a couple other creatures over here that my other opponent has that with a 1 toughness? so I can hit those? Or are there a couple creatures with a 2 toughness on the battlefield that I want to get rid of? So I wait till the counters are on there, then I destroy them, right? That's the kind of neat things that you can do with a card like this. That's why I like it. I think it's a pretty great removal spell. Silver Shroud Costume, 2 mana artifact equipment with flash. When it enters the battlefield, attach it to target creature you control. That creature gains Shroud until end of turn. So pretty interesting. This obviously is very similar to Mithril Coat, which we got last year, which I was a big fan of. I have it in a couple of decks. It is a fantastic colorless option for protecting your creatures, and that's what I see here as well with Silver Shroud Costume. Now it also has equip creature can't be blocked, and of course equip 3. I really love, what I love about Mithril Coat and what I loved about this as well is you don't have to pay the equip cost. I don't love equip cost. I think they're really mana intensive. Normally you would pay 2 and then an additional 3 before you get any effect out of this. That's 5 mana. That's a lot. Here I can flash it in and immediately attaches to likely my commander. And then my commander's unblockable, which is great. And if you have a commander that you don't want being blocked, this is a pretty good option. Is it better than a Whisper Silk Cloak? I would imagine most people would say no. Although I will say, like, it's funny they printed Shroud on here. I don't know when's the last time they printed a card with Shroud. It's been a while. Obviously, one of the reasons why Whisper Silk Cloak can be bad and Lightning Greaves as well is because you want to equip your commander with stuff. Here, that actually fixes that problem. I know the Shroud will go away, but maybe you want the Shroud to go away because you're in a Voltron-y sort of strategy, or you just want to put more stuff on your commander. So it can be a good thing that it goes away because I flash it in. Obviously, you want to protect your commander from some instant speed removal. It's essentially 2 mana instant speed. I protect my commander from removal. And whatever I get after that is just added bonus. That's the way I see it. But you can actually run this in a deck where you're doing a Voltron-y strategy. Obviously, any deck where you want to be getting for damage with your commander lends towards that strategy, and it will actually work because I flash it in, attach it to my commander to protect from that swords, and then the Shroud goes away at the end of turn. So now I can just start equipping stuff onto my commander, right? So it actually works better than you would probably expect in that situation. It certainly is very unique, and I think we're for sure going to see it in the commander format. All right, expert level safe. This one I really like a lot. 2 mana artifact. When expert level safe enters the battlefield, exile the top 2 cards of your library face down. Pay 1 and tap. You and target opponent each secretly choose 1, 2, or 3. I love cards like this that interact with other opponents. I mean, we all do, right? It's extra good in the commander format, but in pretty much any situation, it's a neat interaction between you and your opponent, right? So you're both going to choose secretly 1, 2, or 3. Then those choices are revealed. If they match, you sacrifice it and put all cards exiled with it into their owner's hands. Otherwise, exile the top card of your library face down. Great. And I mean, the flavor here is pretty fantastic. I don't know what this has to do with the game, but obviously you're trying to unlock the safe, and that's where the flavor comes in. So huge flavor win there, in my opinion. The, I guess, worst case scenario here, I don't know, is there a worst case scenario? That's what's so funny about this card is maybe you want the cards right away, so you want the numbers to match. Maybe you don't. You know, it would be funny if you had this card come out and for the entire game, you keep using it and keep using it and keep using it, and the numbers don't match. You can't unlock the safe, so it keeps filling up. You got like 15 cards in exile or something, and the numbers never match, and you never get those cards. So I guess that would be the worst case scenario. That is entirely, like almost impossible that that's going to happen. The other, I guess, sort of worst case scenario is this comes down. And again, maybe some people would consider this to be a good scenario. 2 mana comes down and then you pay 1 right away and immediately crack it and you get those cards. So this becomes 3 mana, draw 2 cards essentially, right? I mean, that's what's going to happen here. If the numbers match, you get those cards in hand. So it essentially becomes 3 mana, draw 2 cards. That's not terrible. I guess, yeah, the more I think about it, the more I think that the scenario where you're never matching numbers and you just keep exiling and exiling and exiling and you never get those cards in your hand, that's the scenario where this is actually really bad. Yeah, it could be. But then, you know, eventually you crack it and you get like 15 cards in your hand. It's a really neat card, I think. It's super interesting for sure. I wonder now if you can get in a political situation here. You know, when a card says you and target opponent each secretly choose 1, 2, or 3, you choose it secretly, but at the same time, can you tell your opponent what, like if I have, you know, I'm going to cast a board wipe. I'm going to cast a board wipe and kill everything. And I know this guy really, really doesn't want me to. Can I tell him choose 1? and then activate this? Are you allowed to do that? It says choose secretly, but I mean, you can just say, hey, if you don't want me to board wipe, choose one and then activate it. Can you do that? Was that cheating? I don't know how that works, to be quite honest. I think it's okay. So I think you can use this in a political way as well. It's a really neat card. All right, let's talk about a couple of commanders here. And I just grabbed a few that I just thought were really interesting. So Cury, Emergent Intelligence, 1 in a blue, legendary artifact creature robot. If you got a robot tribal deck, by the way, there's a whole bunch of stuff in this set for you. 1/3, when Cury, Emergent Intelligent, deals combat damage to a player, draw cards equal to its base power. So obviously, if your commander gets in for damage, as is, you're going to draw 1 card because its base power is 1. However, 1 in a blue, exile another non-token artifact creature you control. Cury becomes a copy of the exiled creature, except it has, whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw cards equal to its base power. So really neat sort of deep dive, I call it going down the rabbit hole, looking for all the neat, interesting artifact creatures you can put in this deck. I mean, you can just put in a Pilgrim's Eye, which you might likely want to put in this deck anyway. I go get a land, and then I exile my Pilgrim's Eye, and now my commander has evasion, so I can very easily get in for damage. So you can do that. You can go the evasion route, but now I'm only drawing 1 card, and it is very important to note here that this ability is exile another non-token artifact creature you control. It becomes that creature. It doesn't have that ability. It only has those stuff in the quotation marks, right? As I say all the time, the quotation marks is essentially printed on the card. So it's Pilgrim's Eye with whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw cards equal to its base power, printed on the Pilgrim's Eye. You cannot switch to something else now. So it's very important that you put a Master Transmuter in this deck or something like that where you can pick your commander up and play it again. Or blinking will work as well, right? Obviously, probably the best case scenario here is like Steel Hellkite, right? Another card that you're going to want to for sure put in the deck. There's a creature that has evasion and also wants to be getting in for damage and is going to draw you a ton of cards, right? That's really where you want to go with this commander. I exile my Steel Hellkite, I get in for a bunch of damage, draw a bunch of cards, destroy all my opponent's stuff as well. There's certainly some neat scenarios you can go with this commander without a doubt. Kate Cage Brawler, red and a green, legendary creature, human warrior, 1/1. And I'll just say this set, again, I'm not a big Fallout guy. I'm not a big Universes Beyond guy either. I haven't even decided if I'm going to get any of these cards. I will say that they do have some very neat, and I'm sure flavorful as well, but really interesting sort of political commanders as well in this set. I have one coming up that I really want to talk about that's super interesting. And this one certainly fits that bill. As long as it's your turn, Kate Cage Brawler has Indestructible, which is great for a number of reasons. Obviously attacking being the main one, which is of course what you want to be doing here. Also, though, the board wipe scenario, right? I can now just cast Blasphemous Act, whatever board wipes I put in my deck, Megaton's Fate, whatever the case may be, and I have no worry about my commander ever dying to those, right? So that's pretty great. Fighting can also work here because your commander is indestructible on your turn, although it is a 1/1. However, whenever Kate attacks, you and defending player each draw a card, then discard a card. So you and your opponent are both doing that. So already we got a ton we can build around here, right? You're forcing your opponent to draw. So you can go down the Zurzauth route, right? Anything that those guys are doing. You're drawing your second card, so you can go down the I draw my second card each turn route. Ironcrag Pyromancer is going to be a slam dunk here for sure. Then also discarding, right? You discard and that player discards. So it might be worth it to put Guest Grimoire in here, maybe. I mean, you're not making your opponents discard a lot, but it certainly would be worth putting in here. And again, that's kind of a weird fit in a Gruul deck, but it fits here for sure. But also, we got more. We got more we can build around. So we got a lot of neat things going on here. And again, just sort of doing the huggy thing a little bit. Your opponents are going to want to loot for sure. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on Kate if you discarded the card with the highest mana value among those cards or tied for the highest. So we're doing that as well. So now we can make our commander bigger and bigger and bigger. Is it going to be worth it though to just shoehorn a bunch of really, really expensive things in this deck just to ensure that you're winning the fight here, right? I mean, obviously the fight spells work with the fighting character, but that's kind of what the discard is as well. Is that going to work? I would say that I would definitely, because you're discarding, I would put Madness in here, and I think it would be definitely worth it to find some Madness cards that are pretty high on the mana value. The thing is, you might be at an advantage here where your opponent is not going to want to discard their expensive stuff, right? That's probably the big advantage you have here. Like they'll likely discard a land or something, especially later in the game. game, right? So you might be at an advantage there already. I don't know if you need to build around that a ton. Like I wouldn't fill my deck with a bunch of super expensive things just to guarantee I win. I think you'll be winning a lot anyway. Madness is going to be great. Find some semi-expensive things, especially ones that have a reduced madness cost. They usually do, right? Usually you can find a little bit more expensive things that have a reduced madness cost. That way you're going to win the fight. You're getting the card draw, and you're getting to cast something as well, so you're not losing any value. Just a lot of neat things you can do with this commander, and it's super neat build around for sure. And I'm going to end off with, yes, man, Personal Securitron. 2 and a white legendary artifact creature, robot 2/2. And I mean, kind of funny. It feels very almost like an uncard. I would say probably a lot of these cards in this set to most Magic players would feel very un-ish. What's this explanation here for this guy? I'm not sure. This is one of the most interesting commanders, though. Like, I can't imagine anybody would be sad to see this across the table from them. That's my thinking. Even if you're not a big Fallout fan, you're probably going to be like, oh, that guy, this is going to be a fun game, right? Why is that? Well, tap target opponent gains control of Yes Man. That's right, you're donating your commander. When they do, you draw 2 cards and put a quest counter on Yes Man. Activate only during your turn. So I'm going to tap this, I'm going to donate it to an opponent, and I get to draw 2 cards. So an incredible political commander already. Of course, now you don't have your commander anymore. Obviously, a Homeward Path is going to be a slam dunk here. There's a few neat things you can already do there. I can do the Homeward Path thing. I can do Oblation, a removal spell that used to get played a lot in the format that doesn't see any play anymore because I own it. Now, I will have to shuffle it into my library, which of course means I put it back in the command zone. But you know, if I don't want my opponents to, I mean, it's an absolute must because what can happen, again, with Karn, I talked about this, where your opponents can pass it around once you lose it and you'll never get it back. So now if my opponents are playing hot potato and keeping it away from me, I can Oblation it, or I guess I can use any removal spell. But Oblation's the best one because I get the draw off of it as well, right? You're going to be passing your commander around. And again, the political game that goes into that is huge. Your opponents aren't going to want to hang on to it. They want to draw cards. So they're going to pass it off maybe to you, maybe to someone else. We've all seen Humble Defector in a commander game. We know how it works. This is going to be a very similar situation. We got more though here. When Yes Man leaves the battlefield, its owner, which of course is you, creates a tapped 1/1 white soldier creature token for each quest counter on it. So there is some build around here. It is not just a silly, I'm just going to pass my commander around and everyone, you know, it's not a hug deck. It's the hug that I like. It's the hug that you are, yes, obviously there's that huggy effect and the political thing as well. Again, you can do the huggy thing that is more political that will advantage you. You're not just like, I don't care how this game goes. You're actually going to care about the way that this is donated to your opponents. You're going to give it to the guy that maybe you know is going to give it back to you. Maybe you're going to do that, right? Again, that Humble Defector scenario. It also might be worth it to put some Proliferate in this deck to be proliferating the quest counters on your commander. Again, even if your opponents have it, you can still be proliferating the counters on it, obviously. And the more it gets passed around, the more white soldier creature tokens you're going to get. And that would be the build around. And I would even put some soldier tribal in here for sure. Giving all those soldiers that you just created +1/+1 seems totally worth it. And it's going to be a funny build because you'll likely have some anthem effects in play. And I mean, I guess you could just do a soldier tribal deck here and, you know, have other soldiers in the deck and the anthems and all of that. And then when your commander leaves the battlefield, you'll get a whole bunch more and that'll be time. Like, you know, that's where I want to Oblation my commander and create a whole bunch of soldier tokens right before my turn and then, you know, close out the game. It's a little bit of a sneaky hug deck that way, right? And I actually really like decks like that. I wonder now, thinking of the Humble Defector situation, I mean, white doesn't need the help with card draw. However, this could be a pretty great commander in the 99. In fact, a couple of these commanders are pretty great in the 99. This one is actually a card that might see quite a bit of play in the 99. Because again, it's just a super fun card in a commander game. It's doing the Humble Defector thing, right? But also, when it leaves the battlefield, they're going to get a bunch of soldiers. I think this would be worth putting in possibly just any soldier tribal deck. I think it would work there for sure. All right, there you go. Cards that are definitely going to see play in the 99 in the commander format. And I threw in a few commanders there as well that I think are really interesting and fun. It all depends how you feel about it, right? Maybe I have convinced you if you were not looking at the Fallout spoilers at all, and if you were not really interested in playing any Universes Beyond stuff, maybe a couple of these cards are just slam dunks in the decks you're playing already. So you're going to give them a shot, whether you are going to or not. I am making you aware of them, right? There's certainly some cards here that, you know, you're going to want to be aware of because you're going to see, they're definitely going to see play in the commander format. And now you know that they are out there. You guys let me know in the comments below what you think of these cards and what your favorite cards are from the Fallout Commander decks. And if you are one of the people that is going to be playing these cards, or maybe you are not. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.